Good evening. Hello. Hello. So, I don't talk about my corporate life very much, but before I came to the church, I spent most of my career in corporate America. And one of the things I did in several of my roles, I would come into an organization and I would usually engage with the HR department, particularly the organizational development people. And I would ask them, so how are you developing the organization? Well, we provide these trainings, and they would invariably go through a long list of all the trainings that they offer. And I would say, and so what are you developing the organization to? Well, we have all these trainings. Here's a list of all the trainings that we do. And so what I would do is I would help the organization think through, okay, as the entire organization, what is it that we have to be really, really, really good at in order to compete and to win against our competitors? Those are called organizational capabilities. What do we have to be really good at? And then once that was clear, and then we would work with each business unit and to say, okay, so as an organization, you have to be really good at this. What do you all have to be really good at to make sure the organization is really good at that? And that could be any number of things. And then within the business unit, we would look at the individual, the employees and the management team to say, what do you have to be really good at? What are the competencies that you need to have in order to make sure that you're tracking with your unit, not only goals, but actually to be really, really good at whatever your unit needs to be good at, to then be sure that the organization is really, really good at it. And so what we would build is a meaningful map of what does development look like? Not just for the sake of development, but the development with some sort of understanding of what we're trying to get to. When I came here, and particularly when I got involved with the Spiritual Life and Learning Center, because of the wide breadth of so many stages and levels of spirituality that we have here in the church, I began to wonder, I need a map. I need to understand, is there a common map that we could be looking at, that we could place ourselves somewhere on that map and understand where we are, but also what's possible. Where can I go from here? And I looked at a lot of different models, and I looked at, I thought, well, maybe I'll just build my own. And then I read Ken Wilber. Ken Wilber is the smartest person you've never heard of. A philosopher, actually by well, I don't even know by training, by selection, I think. He went to Duke. He was either in pre-med or something in the sciences, and he just left. He had no interest in that at all. So let me introduce you to Ken Wilber, tell you a little bit about him. At age 23, he wrote one of the most celebrated books in transpersonal psychology called The Spectrum of Consciousness. He's a philosopher of consciousness. He spent decades doing one thing. He read everything: psychology, philosophy, physics, biology, anthropology, comparative religion, mysticism, developmental theory, East and West, ancient and modern. And then he asked, what do these all have in common? What are the common elements? Now, the interesting thing about Kent, he is not affiliated with any religion. He studied virtually all the religions, and again, looked at them and said, what do they have in common? What are the things here that are shared? Now, his reading is not easy reading, but once it's broken down into simpler language, it becomes, I think, very, very applicable. I can't overstate the impact that his writings have had on me. And I hope that you might hear some of that as we get into this. So, two things we're going to talk about tonight as we think about spiritual development. Two things that Ken Wilber would say is there's two very, very important things. A third one we're going to touch on, but two very important things: growing up and waking up. Growing up and waking up. Now, I will share that this is, you're kind of guinea pigs. We're going to be doing a presentation April 18th with the Jung Association. That's a Saturday. Saturday from 9:30 to 12:30. We're going to be talking about spiritual development and the role of the shadow self. And that's where the Jung folks are going to come in on that one. So this is my experiment with the concept. So we'll see how we do. So growing up is a model. And so what Ken Wilber did, he looked at every psychosocial moral development model out there. And he said, okay, what are the common stages? What are the common things? So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. This is the why. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. So let's talk about these growing up stages. We're going to start at the bottom here. Now, on your desk, you've also got these, but they're or your table, excuse me. But they're starting at the top with it's the same model. It's just starting in a different direction. So let's talk about these growing up stages. Now, here's what's interesting about these stages. Not only are they true as individual human beings, but they're true also about cultures, countries, politics, and I think you'll start to see some of those connections. Let's take a look at the first stage, archaic. Archaic. This is a I need to exist phase. So think about a newborn baby. Archaic. Baby is completely dependent, needs to exist. Well, everything the baby does is about existence, is about staying alive. Second, magic. This phase is where the baby now understands that there are these immediate other people, particularly mother. So there is this other person, but the baby also understands there's some almost symbiotic connection to this other person. So there's a me, and there's sort of a you, but the you is there to serve me. All right, you got that developmentally? Make sense? The third level, and one of the things you're going to notice as we go through these stages, is they begin to grow in complexity and wholeness. You'll see that it continues to grow in complexity and wholeness. So the third one, stage 3, I will not be controlled. Egocentric, impulsive, power-driven. The self fully emerges in a really forceful kind of way. Again, at this stage, the self is trying to disconnect from that symbiotic relationship. It's trying to establish its own identity, its own personhood. Stage 4, mythic traditional. This is characterized by there is a right way and I will follow it. There's a right way, no other way, and whatever way that is, I will follow it. It's rule-based, conformist. It's ethnocentric. Up to this point, we've been egocentric. The first 3 stages, it's all about me as an individual. Now we're moving into a different section where now it's me and my group. It's me and my family. It's me and my tribe. It's me and my country. It's me and my party. But now it's ethnocentric. It's breaking up into groups. Next slide, please. The next phase, rational modern. This can be characterized by, let me figure out how this actually works. So now we're really starting to kind of experiment with the world and look at what's going on in the world, and we're starting to develop a really rational mind. So we want to know how things work. This is scientific, achievement-oriented, evidence and progress drive decision-making. It's the basis of modern liberal democracy and capitalism at this stage. The next phase is everyone's perspective matters. Number 6, pluralistic postmodern. Everybody's perspective matters. We're all equal. Everyone's perspective is just as valid as anyone else's. What do I want to say about it? Very egalitarian, pluralistic, high value of diversity and inclusion, relativism. We, as a country, we saw this starting in the 60s with the civil rights movement. We saw this developmental phase within the country in the civil rights movement, feminist movement, where suddenly we're trying to level the playing field across all populations. And then the next phase is stage 7 is integral. This is super complex. Now it's how do we integrate all of these different perspectives? How do we integrate all these different stages? This is a challenging one. Now, some of you may be familiar with James Fowler, who did similar work, and he came up with quite a list. And I found actually his terminology, I was struggling with his terminology. Scott Peck came down and boiled it down to actually, I think, 4 phases, which made it much more manageable. So let's go to the next slide, if you would. So here is a kind of a summarized version of all of these steps. Now again, what Wilber's doing, he's drawing on developmental psychologists such as Piaget, Kohlberg, Keegan, and he maps out how humans move through increasing complex stages of meaning-making, ethics, and worldview. You get the sense here that this is sort of how we've all gone through these. Not all these stages, but we've gone through these. And so one way to think about it is the first phase is egocentric, all about me. The next phase is ethnocentric, it's about my group. The next phase is world-centric, all about all humanity. And the last part is cosmocentric. It's all about all life and all being, all creatures. So again, we're developing this way, and these are stages. So this is what it means in terms of Ken Wilber's world. This is what it means to grow up. To grow up. Now, one of the benefits of this model is to understand, because we could be, the thing about this model is we don't necessarily see what stage we're in, because we're living in it. We're looking at the world through it, so we don't even know we're looking through it. We don't know what stage we're in. But by having a model to look at, now we can, instead of looking through it, we can look at it. So what does this stage mean? What do I think about this stage? What's next? What's the next stage? And how might I get there? And that's the power, I think, of having a model, is that I can see where I am, I can plot where I am on it, and then I can also look at what's possible. If we don't have a model, we think wherever we are is it. We don't know anything past that. We just know that stage. Next slide, please. So, how does this play out in faith? So we'll start off with egocentric. So the image of God is normally that of a protector, provider for me. I don't really care about anybody else, but it's for me. The prayer style can be petitioning and bargaining. Now, we talked about the shadow side. There's a risk here, is that if at the egocentric stage, we can have a very transactional view of religion. I will do this for you, God, if you do this for me. Ethnocentric, champion of my group or nation, is the image of God. God is all for us, not for those other people, but for us. There's group loyalty. The prayer style is group loyalty and intercession. The shadow risk is we develop an us versus them theology. Not that we've seen anything like that in recent history, but it's possible. And then world-centric, the image of God is God of all humanity, compassion and seeking justice. The risk here is that there can be a sense of being morally superior to all those other people who don't happen to share my perspective. And lastly, the cosmocentric is the image of God is this ground of all being. It's not necessarily a person or an individual entity, but is the ground of all being. Contemplation and a unifying prayer gets us here. Now, the risk here is that we can, there's work to do as we go through these developmental stages. We have to there's some work that we have to do. We have to stretch our brain and our thinking and our awareness. Spiritual bypassing is when we lean heavily into, and we'll talk about waking up, when we lean so heavily in waking up that we don't do the work of growing up. We'll talk more about that in a second. Next slide. All right, let's play with this one for a little bit. I've got 4 questions here. Take on the first 2. Let's just take on the first 2. So at your table, play with these questions. What image of God did you grow up with, and how has it changed? What stage might it reflect? So this is a good chance to kind of take a look, and you've got some supporting documents there on your table. Take a look and see maybe where you're plotting yourself on this developmental scale. The second question is, can you recall a moment when your faith expanded beyond your group or tradition? What happened? So what we're looking at is what happened when we moved from one developmental stage to another. So go ahead and take a few minutes and wrestle with those questions. And if you're sitting by yourself, go ahead and join the table. We'll give this roughly 7 minutes. Okay, let's reconvene. So, any insight? Anything interesting come up in the conversation? Anything that we want to share with the rest of the group? Any insights? Anything come to mind? Did you note changes? Were you able to articulate some changes in our understanding of God? And perhaps link that back to how it relates to whatever developmental phase or stage we might have been in. All right, let's press on. So, Ken Wilbur, as we mentioned, there's 2 very important areas to be considering when we talk about our spiritual development. So we talked about growing up. The next is waking up. Waking up. Let's go ahead and share the next slide. So, what does it mean to wake up? So, first of all, let me share with you what he did to get to this model. He studied all the ancient religions. Studied and particularly the mystics and the contemplatives of each religions, the various religions. And he said that the growth in consciousness was actually really similar across all those traditions. So this expanding and growth of our consciousness, our waking up, that process was very similar across all the various traditions. So what are we talking about? What it is. So let me read. Waking up is the direct realization of ultimate reality, the discovery of our real self, big mind, the ground of all being, and I would even say the divine. So let me draw a distinction here for a second. If we think about our faith structures, whatever faith tradition that might be, just kind of what we believe in, I would call that orthodoxy. It answers the question, so what do we believe? It's a cognitive exercise. What do we believe? When we talk about waking up, we're not talking about a cognitive exercise. We're talking about actually an experiential experience of the divine, of growing in our awareness of our connection to the ultimate ground of being. It's not intellectual. It's experiencing it firsthand. So I want to clarify that. So it's a direct, non-conceptual encounter with the divine. It can include states of unity, peace, luminosity, love, enlightenment, awakening, a unitive consciousness where suddenly I have this understanding that all things are connected. The other thing that happens, there's nothing worse than if you happen to have a waking up experience trying to articulate it, because words just fall short. They don't make sense. What it's not a permanent possession after one experience. It's not a reward for moral behavior. It's not a replacement for psychological health. And it's not the bypassing of the work of growing up, going back to our earlier stages. So in the Christian tradition, we see different examples of this. We see it in centering prayer, Lectio Divina. Mystical union is described by the desert fathers and mothers, the Quakers' inner light, and some make the connection to Psalms, be still and know that I am God. So waking up is not a cognitive exercise. It is an experience achieved through some sort of contemplative practice. Okay, next slide. So what are those stages, or actually these states? And again, they progress. So as one engages in a contemplative practice, they're going to move along this continuum. And no matter what tradition, contemplative tradition one comes from, they're going to follow this same path. And again, don't be too put off by the words. We'll go through these. But with the understanding that we're moving from okay, I understand this is sort of the natural world on the gross nature part, to all the way to the other end, which is, I understand now that there is no duality. Things are not separate. That there is a unifying, there's a unitive aspect to to this ground of being. And you can see it's even hard to articulate. It's a challenge. But this is the growth. This is the trajectory. So let's talk about these. So state one, gross or waking. This is just ordinary waking consciousness, everyday life, that maybe we start to become aware of, oh, it's a beautiful day. I'm actually seeing the sun. I'm maybe noticing it for the first time. I am waking up and becoming more aware of the natural world around me. Sometimes if you're out in nature, you'll have some experiences. You'll have a waking up experience by being out in nature. The next one is the dream state. This is when we start to maybe dive a little more deeply into prayer, where maybe we start to have some visions, or we gosh, in a weird way, we sort of seemed like God was talking to me. So there's something that's happening where I'm moving just from the purely physical world to I'm entering into this other realm where these kind of weird things are taking place and happening. The next one, causal witness. This is an interesting one. This is when we can really start to settle into pure silence. Pure silence. And we start to no longer be associated and connected with our thoughts. So we might find ourselves saying, instead of I am anxious, we might say, there's anxiety. I'm really nervous. There's nervousness. So we start to separate from these things and we start to look at it almost objectively. We no longer are connected to it or associated with it. And finally, let me talk about the witness too. The witness is when now we are, and actually you can do this pretty quickly. The witness is when there's a part of us inside that is watching our thoughts. And we can, through practice, we can actually train ourselves simply to watch those thoughts, not connect to them and latch onto them, simply watch them and watch them go by. And watch, maybe even witness how I'm responding to those. So I'm witnessing my response without getting hooked into it. That's the witness phase. And then finally, the non-dual. This is where the boundary between self and God dissolves. Not that you become God, but there's a connection now that you are actually experiencing. So writers such as Meister Eckhart, Julian of Norwich, some of the great mystics will talk about this. But suddenly, so we went from, hey, I'm becoming aware of the natural world, to all the way to now this non-dualism where I am understanding that there is this meshing now of myself with God. Okay, next slide, please. Richard Rohr says this: Christianity pushed waking up into the afterlife, meaning the only time you're going to experience God is when you die. Reducing faith to moral transactions rather than transformation. Waking up is all about transformation. Next slide, please. So, let's spend a little time with this. Let's just do the first two. If you would, have conversations about, have you had a moment of genuine spiritual experience, a sense of God's presence, unity, or waking up? And if so, what was that like? The second question, was that experience a temporary state, or did it produce lasting change? And what made the difference? So let's take a few minutes and have conversations around those questions. Okay. Let's reconvene. All right. So we've talked about growing up. We've talked about waking up with the understanding that these are two very different things. But there's some really interesting interaction that takes place here. And I think what we're about to talk about changes everything. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So you see on the left-hand side, you'll see our developmental stages. My left-hand side, excuse me. You'll see the developmental stages. Then across the top, you'll see the states, the waking up states. By the way, maybe one way to think about non-dual is that we come to realize that we were never separated from God to begin with. We just didn't know it. So here's something called the Wilbur-Combs lattice. And I think this is fascinating. So what this says is, let's say, no matter what stage you are in, when I say stage, I'm looking at the vertical column. No matter what developmental stage you're in, you can have those awakening experiences. Every single stage, you can have those experiences. But you will always interpret them and understand them in the context of the stage you're in. Does that make sense? This is wild. So, for example, let's say I am egocentric I'm at the egocentric state, and I have a profound spiritual experience, non-dual, so I may end up saying to myself, I am God. Which is very different than I am now connected, part of God. But I am God. I will interpret that experience through the lens of my developmental stage. Now, let's talk about Christian nationalism. Because we hear these folks and we go, I don't know what Bible they're reading. I don't know what church they're going to, but there's nothing Christian about it. Yes, there is. So let's put Christian nationalists at the ethnocentric level. Let's look at them at that level of development. Any spiritual experience that they have, they will see it through the ethnocentric lens. So it makes perfect sense to them. I hate to use them, but we all do this. And so what this means is, if you want to start to tangle with someone theologically, don't go theological, go developmental. What developmental phase are they in? What stage are they in? That will tell you almost everything you need to know about how they're going to approach their spirituality. Now, there's a couple other scenarios here. Let's say I'm at the cosmocentric stage, highly integral, a guru who happens to be doing terrible things to children without anybody knowing about it. So developmentally, I'm at the cosmocentric stage. I'm at the lowest end of the awakening stage. And this is really, really important. So as we hear differences amongst ourselves in terms of making sense out of various spiritual experiences, two people can have the same, let's say, causal witness experience, but because they're at different developmental stages, they're going to understand that experience completely differently. Does that make sense? This changes everything. This changes everything. So the point that we want to make here is no matter what developmental stage we're in, every stage has access to those awakening stages. But those awakening stages will always be interpreted based on their developmental stage. Yes?
Can we know what our developmental stage is?
Sure. I can tell you what yours is. No, I'm kidding. No, I would encourage you, actually, if you look at the 7 stages, just on your own time, just take a look at it and just see where you kind of line up. And see what you're going to be looking for is psychological and moral alignment. So of these 7 stages, which one do I psychologically and morally seem to attach to or associate or line up with? Yes. Oh, absolutely. That's growing up. It should. It absolutely should. Now, it doesn't always. James Fowler talked about how people stabilize. They hit a certain level, they stabilize. But I think one of the key reasons about that, three key reasons. One is the community that they're in. And so they formed a community around that stage, so that puts a lot of pressure on. 2, they don't know there's anything else. They don't know there's another level that's possible. And that's why this developmental model can be really freeing. It shows us what's possible. But otherwise, we just wouldn't know. There's a third one, I can't remember what it was. Okay, I think this one's really important. Make sense? Yes? Okay, let's go to the next slide. I included this one just because I really like the colors. It's the same thing. It's just all 7 stages on the left, and then you'll see the awakening states across the top. But I just like the colors. Okay, next slide. So, what does it mean to grow up and wake up? Your developmental stage shapes how you interpret spiritual experience. That is so important. Your developmental phase shapes your spiritual experience. Two people can have the same mystical experience and draw completely opposite conclusions. A person can be woken up, yet interpret it through an immature frame, narcissism or dogmatism. And faith communities often get stuck at ethnocentric. It's us, we know the truth, it's us versus them. And each of these stages have a shadow side. Again, we can think, we might be at the at level 6, Wilbur calls it green, but where we're all about community and we understand the interconnectedness of all things, and yet we have disdain for anybody who doesn't believe the way we believe. So there's a shadow element. There's a piece to that we need to pay attention to. Next slide, please. So, one-dimensional spirituality we just need to be cautious of. If we're waking up only, so we're only focused on our waking up stages, we're not focused on our growing up stages. Peak experiences, we might have peak experiences, but we won't have any maturity about that. We might have spiritual gifts, but ethically blind to some things. The enlightened, as an example, the enlightened teacher, and we see this all the time, the enlightened teacher who harms others. And mystical experience without moral growth. Keep in mind, psychological and moral development happens at the growing up stages. If we grow up only, we have moral sophistication without a sense of transcendence. Religion starts to look as it's a form of behavior management. Faith is ethics. We don't focus on encountering God like we would through our waking up experience. And Christianity can oftentimes be reduced to transactions. Wilbur says, wake up without growing up. You might end up spiritually gifted, but personally immature. Next slide. So, both parts are essential. I like what he says here. Psychological maturity supports deeper spiritual realization, which fuels compassionate engagement in the world. But that psychological and moral growth supports our work at awakening. Next slide, please. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time with this, but I've mentioned shadow. I'll tell you what, if you want to hear more about the shadow part of this, come April 18th, and we're going to talk a lot about this, about how the shadow piece interacts with all this work. Sorry? South, First Community South, Burkhart Chapel. Next slide, please. So, what does an integral spiritual growth plan look like? Well, keep in mind, we've got to grow up and we have to wake up. We have to grow up and we have to wake up. So, growing up, audit your image of God. Is it egocentric, ethnocentric, or world-centric? 2, read a book on developmental faith. I will tell you this, Richard Rohr was heavily influenced by Ken Wilber. Anything you read by Richard Rohr, you'll see it. So I would recommend that. If you read anything by Thomas Keating, who writes a lot about centering prayer, he was heavily influenced by Ken Wilber as well. So I invite you to take a look at those books. Seek a spiritual director who integrates psychology and faith. Here's another thing I want to mention. If you remember, all contemplative traditions follow the same developmental course. Now, we as people in the West, we tend to just want to go at all this stuff by ourselves. I can do it myself. I'll just read books. I'll just read books about it. There's an important distinction I want to draw. One is being, Howard Gardner out of Harvard did a whole bunch of work on what he called multiple intelligences. So emotional intelligence, scientific intelligence, that people can be smart in different areas. And one of those areas was spiritual intelligence. Now, here's one of the things is we can confuse being spiritually intelligent with actually doing the work, without actually engaging in contemplative practice. We can read about it, talk about it, which is different than actually doing it. So there's a distinction between spiritual intelligence and actually doing the work. The point I want to make here is the contemplative traditions have, there's tremendous value to be working with, talking with somebody who knows this path really well. Because things happen. Things happen along this path that it is really important and helpful if somebody knows that because they've traveled it. So I want to encourage us that if we're really thinking about taking on a contemplative practice, to consider doing it with a spiritual director, a group, someone who, again, who has traveled the path before us. It can be very helpful. Listen to people's stories. I don't know if there's any better way to grow up than by really listening to people outside of our own lens about what they're saying. Just listening. That is a wonderful way to grow up. So seek out people who see the world differently than you do. Stay with questions that you find are unsettling. Here's an interesting question. This is an idea of practice moral imagination. Ask, what would I have to believe about the world for this to make sense? I love that. Waking up. Adopt one daily contemplative practice. Could be centering prayer. By the way, we do centering prayer every Thursday at South from 5 to 6. Aim for 20 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day. I don't care. Doesn't matter as long as it's consistent. The consistency is really important. And again, join or form a contemplative small group for accountability. Cleanup. This is where we just have to watch out for the shadow element. So it could be therapy, it could be journaling, it could be having somebody that will really call you out on your stuff. So someone who's going to be really honest with you. It's just important to have somebody who's helping you see some of these shadow elements that may be impacting your spiritual development. Next slide. So the goal, the goal of all spiritual work is not personal or private perfection. I'm reminded of our scripture with Paul, what Paul said. But surrender, love, and union with God. And that's Richard Rohr. So, our spiritual development, there's a map for it. We don't have to figure it out on ourselves, by ourselves. There are maps. We have a growing up map that we can follow. We have a waking up map that we can follow. We don't have to just figure it out for ourselves. So there's maps that help us to grow up, to wake up, and clean up, and show up in the world as increasingly and growing whole human beings. So some of you are thinking, I have no idea what the hell that guy just spent all that time talking about. And that's okay. That's okay. I invite you to take some of the stuff home. If you're interested in reading, Ken Wilber's has got a ton of books out. The one that I think is really manageable in this space is Integral Meditation. It's a great book. This is not easy stuff, and yet it has everything to do with how we develop spiritually. Sorry. So it's integral theory. Actually, the title of the presentation is Integral Path to Spiritual Formation. But the book is Integral Meditation. But he's got a bunch of books. The interesting thing about his books, it's all the same model. All the same model, he just applies it in different ways. He wrote a book called A Brief History of Everything. That pretty well covers it. That pretty well took care of it. All right, can we end in prayer real quick? God of grace, thank you for the opportunity to stretch and think and maybe look at things a little differently. We ask your guidance and we ask for your wisdom as we continue to try to grow up and wake up. We ask that we continue on this path knowing that it never ends. Pray these things in the name of the God of many names. Amen. Thank you.